All right, so we're going to talk about presidential elections. We are going to focus on the Electoral College, the process and all of the problems associated with the Electoral College, so that we can find out more about how the president is selected. What we see here is a map of the Electoral College as it stood from 2010 to 2020. We'll talk about how those numbers get adjusted every year, but it shows how many electoral votes each state is worth. What we want to do today, our objective, we want to describe the Electoral College process. We're going to look at all of the different aspects of selecting a president using the Electoral College, and this way we'll be able to evaluate the Electoral College as a form of selecting the president. So our big question today, what we're going to try to answer over the course of today, is how do we select a president in the United States? All right, so first we're going to just talk about the Electoral College and what it is, some of the different aspects of it and everything. What's unique about the Electoral College is that it makes all of our states important from time to time. So what we see in the background here, we see a news report about how the election outcome hinges on 4 different uncalled states. This is a very unique feature of the American presidential election, that each state is worth a certain number of points, and it makes each state potentially very important in the presidential election. So we'll talk about this process and why these states become so important, and what all this means for presidential elections in the United States. First of all, I have to deal with the obvious. I've told you guys I grade this test every year, and whenever we have questions about the Electoral College, we will constantly get people writing responses about going to the Electoral College or treating the Electoral College like it is a place. The Electoral College is a process. This is the institution, the long-term process that we use for electing the president and vice president every 4 years. So I want to be clear that this is a process, a plan of action. You cannot go to the Electoral College. We do not send people to the Electoral College. The Electoral College is a process that takes place in the states and ultimately takes place in Congress. And the Electoral College changes over time. Just like reapportionment in the census, the census is used to adjust the Electoral College every 10 years to keep up with changes in the American population. Make sure that the states are worth the appropriate number of votes. So the Electoral College is made up of 538 electors from the 50 states and from Washington, D.C. Each state gets a certain number of electors that are chosen by the state. The state gets to determine how they choose electors, but at this point, just about every state lets the people vote, and the results of the presidential election within that state determine which political party gets to nominate electors to the Electoral College. So each state gets a number of electors that is determined by adding up the number of congressmen they have. So we take the number of representatives in the House, add the 2 senators, and that is how many electoral votes each state has. Just about every single state, all the state, 48 of the states, all of them but 2, award the electors on a winner-take-all basis using a plurality vote. That means that the candidate who gets the most votes in a state is going to get all of the state's electoral votes. That's what the winner-take-all means. The plurality part means that it goes to the candidate who gets the most. It does not have to be 51%. If there were 3 candidates and each of them got pretty much even votes, the candidate who got 34%, while the other 2 candidates got 33%, would get all of the state's electoral votes. So it does not have to be 51%, but the winner-take-all system means that all of the state's electoral votes are going to go to the candidate who received the most votes in that state. Maine and Nebraska are our 2 states that do not use the winner-take-all method. Like we said, the states can decide to give away their electoral votes however they choose to do it. And so Maine and Nebraska use a process called the district method, which means that they give 1 electoral vote for each of their congressional districts. So in Maine and in Nebraska, you can actually split the electoral votes. And the Republican candidate can win some of the votes while the Democratic candidate can win some of the votes. So states do not have to use the winner-take-all method, but 48 of our 50 states do. Maine and Nebraska use this district method, and the states themselves have the freedom to decide how to give their votes to the candidate of their choice. Now, when you go to vote for president, you see the name of the presidential candidate. So when you go to vote for president, you're choosing between candidates like Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But if you actually pay attention to what you're voting for there is you are voting for electors that pledge to vote for the candidate of your choice. So when I go and cast my vote in a presidential election, I'm not technically voting for the candidate, but I am voting for a group of electors who promise to go to Washington, D.C. and vote for the candidate that I choose. So this is the step where the voters are separated from having a direct impact on the presidential election. It is the Electoral College electors who will be voting for president. Now, the people who serve as electors, there's no real rules for who they can be. There's only one rule. They cannot be members of Congress. Other than that, the states could choose anyone to serve as electors. So each state picks them a little bit differently. Usually, in the states, each party has a convention and they're going to nominate people to be electors. But these positions, since the Electoral College process itself is a very official ceremony that takes place in Washington, D.C., mostly these positions of electors are given out to people as like rewards for being a lifelong party member or for being very, very loyal or important to the party. So they're given out as like rewards for party loyalty. So the people who are chosen as electors are probably the least likely people to get to Washington, D.C. and then change their mind and vote for someone else. But these people, like if the Democrats are choosing electors, what they're doing is they're choosing from people who have been lifelong Democrats, who have donated money to the party and hosted fundraisers and maybe run for office themselves. And then these positions are given out as rewards for party loyalty. For example, in the 2020 election, the state of New York is using Hillary Clinton as one of their Democratic electors. They can choose literally anybody that they want to who's been they can choose anybody they want to, and they usually choose people who have been lifelong party members. Now, once the people are chosen as electors, there's actually no law that requires them to vote the way that the voters of a state voted. The voters of a state have chosen the electors. The electors are going to go to Washington, D.C. to vote for president. And technically, they can vote for anybody that they want to vote for. But like we mentioned, they were chosen because of their loyalty to the party. So they are very unlikely to do so. But in the event that electors to the Electoral College change their mind, we call these people faithless electors. Faithless electors are members of the Electoral College who vote differently than the vote outcome of their state. So there's no federal law that tells the electors that they have to vote a certain way. Some states have passed laws that require them to do so, but the punishment for voting a different way is just a small fine or something like that. There's no real punishment to stop them from doing so. So faithless electors, they can go to Washington, D.C., and they can vote differently than the voters do. This is why the Electoral College is actually a check on the majority population. This is designed by Madison to be a check on the public. The Electoral College is supposed to serve as a check, and if the people were to vote for someone completely crazy, the Electoral College would save us from that outcome in the presidential election. So in the map here, you can see blue states and green states. The blue states are states that have passed laws that require their Electoral College members to vote the way that the people voted. The green states have not passed those laws. So in the green states, the voters can vote however they want. And in the blue states, if they were to vote differently than the voters, they're really just going to face a small fine. In 2016, this is pretty rare, but it happens. In 2016, there were 7 faithless electors. So 5 of the electors for Hillary Clinton refused to vote for Hillary Clinton, and 2 of the electors for Donald Trump refused to vote for Donald Trump. All right, so that's a little bit of information about the Electoral College and what it is. We're going to move on and talk about the official process, how this happens in D.C., and what plans are in place in case the Electoral College goes wrong. And then we'll also take a little bit of time and look at the advantages and disadvantages of using the Electoral College.